I want to talk to you this week about fine art photography. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, what is fine art photography? And it's a very difficult one to answer, really. It's not something that you can pigeonhole and say that is definitely fine art and that is definitely not fine art. But it's when documentary photography is changed into a style that the photographer prefers and not how it looks in camera. So in other words, if you take a picture of a bridge and you think, well, that's me documenting how that bridge looks, but the artistic flair within the photographer decides, I don't really like how that looked, so I'm going to make some changes, for the good or for the bad. The fact is, if he makes changes to that image, then in theory, I would consider that probably to be fine art photography. Obviously, it's a very thin line because it depends on what the photographer was to change. But the best way that I can explain what fine art photography is simply this. If you can create an image and then make it sellable by doing whatever you do to the image, you make it sellable, but you make it sellable to somebody who wouldn't ordinarily like that style or that genre of photography. So in other words, if you were to take a landscape picture, but then make the image sellable to somebody who wouldn't necessarily like landscape pictures, then in my opinion, that then is more than likely to be classed as fine art photography. That's my opinion anyway, and it's a very difficult thing to broach. But look, let me give you an explanation. If you look at this picture now, then you can see that's just a standard picture that pretty much everybody is likely to take. But I don't like how that picture looks because, okay, I'm documenting it and that's exactly how the picture looks right now. But that's not me, that's not my style of photography. So I'm going to change it and take the picture and then post-process the image to make it look like this. Now, again, it's all subjective. You don't have to like what I've done. You might love what I've done. But the fact is, what I've done there is produce what I consider to be a piece of art. And therefore, maybe somebody who wouldn't ordinarily like landscape photography might like that image on their office wall to, when they walk into their office every day to brighten them up and put a smile on their face. They might like it to be in their living room. You understand what I'm saying? The fact is, it's all very subjective. Art is a subjective, it's subjective anyway, isn't it? Let's be honest, art is very subjective. And you either like it or you don't like it. But there you go, that's my impression of what I consider to be fine art photography. So let me talk you through my setup now then. Without stating the obvious, camera on a very sturdy tripod. I'm using a 24mm lens. I'm nice and wide. I'm focusing on the shell as well because the shell is pretty much a third of the way into the frame. So that's going to render everything in focus at f11. I'm at a 4-minute exposure at ISO 50. And that 4-minute exposure, again, is going to give me a really flat sea and, of course, a blurry sky. I've taken a few more pictures as well already with a faster shutter speed, which will freeze the detail in the sky because very often I change them over. But today, if I'm honest, I probably won't. The idea of this today is to make it fine art. And fine art, as far as I'm concerned, is I like to keep it really minimalistic. And if it's minimalistic, then it tends to look more arty. And that's really it. So I've got a 10-stop filter on there, 0.9 grad, and that's it. That's my settings and my trusty trigger, 4-minute exposure. And let's see how that looks. now we're back in the studio. Let's choose one of these pictures and let's put it into Photoshop, and I'll show you exactly how I post-process my images. Okay, so I've opened this image up. Now the first thing you'll notice is I'm not using Lightroom. I've been doing this job for just shy of 20 years, and I've always used Photoshop. I'm not a Lightroom fan, but don't worry if you are a Lightroom fan. Everything I'll be doing in the pre-Photoshop screen, which is called ACR, Adobe Camera Raw, that's my Camera Raw converter, or that's Adobe's Camera Raw converter, then everything I do here you can replicate in Lightroom because it uses the same engine. So if you're a Lightroom fan, don't switch off, stick around. So this is my image now loaded into ACR. This is the pre-Photoshop screen, like I said earlier. The first thing I'm going to do now is these tabs up here. The first thing I'm going to do is click on this tab here, and I'm going to click on this button here, which will remove my chromatic aberration. The chromatic aberration basically is, it's almost like if you looked at the peaks of mountains and then zoomed in an awful lot, then what you'll actually find is that you'll get a purple or a very slight blue line on them. Okay, that's what chromatic aberration actually is. So if you click on that, Photoshop does a very good job of removing that. You can also go in and manually do it and so on and so forth, but I never really need to do that. That does a pretty good job to me. And also my lens profile corrector. Now watch, click on that, and I always click on that. So let's say, for instance, look at the horizon, for instance. What this will actually do now then is any bode that the lens offers the camera will be straightened and will be corrected in Photoshop, and it's very, very good actually. And I always click on that, always. So now those two are selected, let's go back to our very first tab. And before I do anything now, then all I'm going to do is hit C for my crop tool. You can hit that icon up there, and I'm now going to crop the image to suit me. I'm going to right mouse click to bring up my ratio options, and in this particular image I'm going to choose 9:16, which is a favorite of mine anyway. 9:16, drag that across there. I'm going to keep rules of thirds in this instance, and you can see my horizon is absolutely dead level, and the reason why my horizon is dead level in camera is simply because when I take the picture I always use the level on the back of the camera, and it's pretty accurate. So that's why that looks like that. And even though I'm using my rules of thirds, I'm going to put the foreground interest, or even the main interest in the whole image, which is that shell. I'm going to put that right slap bang in the middle, but you can just basically choose where you want to put your main focal point, but I'm going to choose the lower middle because I think that's a nice balance to that image. So all I'm going to do now then is on these tabs on the right hand side, I'm going to make my adjustments. If I look up here, my histogram is showing a pretty decent lit image. It's decently lit. Nothing is overexposed, so there's no spiking on the right hand side, and nothing is underexposed, there's no spiking on the left hand side. So I'm pretty happy on how that looks. And all I'm going to do now then is, it's actually laid out as per your workflow, which is really quite handy. So I'm going to set my white balance first of all. I'm going to play around my white balance. I'm pretty happy with how that looks. Now, if you look at my image has a very slight blue hue to it. Now, the reason why it has a very slight blue hue to it is simply because I used a 10 stopper. So my lead 10 stopper tends to offer my images a very slight blue hue, but I'm a fan of it, so I'm going to leave that on there. Moreover, I think this image is better off in black and white, so I'm going to choose black and white. So I'm going to click on this button up here to convert my image to black and white. Now, even though I've converted my image to black and white, it's really important for you to ensure that your white balance was correct to begin with. And the reason why I say that is because even though the image is in black and white, if I changed my white balance now, you can very quickly see how awful your image can start to look. Like if you look at the highlighted areas within the sky, if I play around up here, which obviously is a little extreme, but you can see how it will actually make a difference to how your image will eventually look. So let's put that back to where it was. Okay, now once again, looking at this histogram, the light is perfectly fine, but there's no magic formula to this. If you want your image brighter than that, then make it brighter. That's it. There's no magic formula. Just make sure that you keep detail throughout the frame. I hate images where detail is lost through parts of the image being overexposed. Is a massive pet hate of mine. So all I'm going to do now with my exposure, move it slightly to the right, but just very slightly. I'm going to move my contrast very slightly to the right, but not too much. I never go above 10. And the reason why I never go above 10 is simply this, is because when you push a contrast slider to the right, all that happens is the darks get darker and the whites get whiter, but you don't have enough control over the whole image on how that looks. So I tend not to use my contrast slider too much. And the reason why is because I have a black and white slider down here, so I can independently move the whites and independently move the blacks. Now my highlight slider ordinarily would be pushed way to the left hand side to claw any detail back in any of the highlighted areas. Likewise, my shadow slider would be pushed to the right to make sure any detail that's in the shadowy areas would come out. Okay, so I push my shadow slider to the right hand side, and now I can add a bit of punch to this image with my black and white sliders. I can get my white slider and push it to the right, and get my black slider and push it to the left. So now I'm making the blacks blacker and the whites whiter. Just get it so it just looks nice. And my clarity slider, which is next in line, I'm going to push that to the right ever so slightly. Again, just be very wary what you do with the clarity slider, because the clarity slider will tend to pull out all the nitty bitty details in the frame. But the problem is it's one of the common mistakes that people do when they first start post-processing their work, because they want more detail in their image, especially if they're using cheaper camera gear, because they think this will fix images that aren't quite maybe as sharp. But it doesn't. Your images will start to look very false very quickly. So please be very careful what you do with your clarity slider. Don't push it too much. Okay, now I'm not really going to do anything else with this image. I don't need to. A bit of a tip for you, this curve slider here, the curve slider is fantastic, but try and avoid using it in ACR, try and avoid using it in Lightroom as well. But the only reason why I'm saying that is because whatever you do to your sliders here will affect the image as a whole. So just be very careful with that. You don't get much control here. Wherefore, if you put this image into Photoshop, then using a separate layer, using layer masks, etc., then you get much more control over your curves and your levels. So I don't ever touch it here. I don't need to sharpen. There's no noise reduction needed because the image was shot at ISO 50. I can change the way the image is converted to color, or from color to black and white here. And the reason why, or how I can do that, is the blues, for instance. If I move that blue slider left and right, you can see how that will greatly change the image. However, once again, be very careful, because it will start looking very false very quickly. And look how bitty that image is starting to get. So just err on the side of caution and just tickle these sliders. But I'm not going to touch that because that image looks perfectly fine to me. Okay, split toning, never use it. We've already made adjustments there. That's it. That's all my settings, and I honestly recommend that you don't do any more than what I've done now. Even if you're using Lightroom, don't over process the work. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now, tools up here, I love the tools up here, the straightening tool. Don't use things like the spot removal tool, because again, you get much more control in Photoshop than you will do here. If you're used to using your spot removal tools here in Lightroom, then fine, go ahead and clean this image up, because this image definitely needs cleaning up. But I would never do this here. Personally, I prefer to do this in Photoshop. Okay, I like these localized adjustment tools. This is when it gets a bit more exciting for me. So you've got your adjustment brush there, you've got your graduated filter there, and your radial filter as well. And these are fantastic tools, but I wouldn't use them at this present moment in time, unless of course I thought the image needed some adjustments, which I don't. I like the way this image is. So in Adobe Camera Raw and in Lightroom, what I recommend you do is just simply get your image cropped, get your horizon level, that's so important, and then make sure your lighting is correct. Nothing any more than that. Then go ahead and open the image into Photoshop. Okay, now the image is opened up in Photoshop, there's a couple of things that I need to address. The first thing I now need to do is to clean my image up, and I need to look at these points here, clean all this up, clean all this up, and clean all this up. Once I've cleaned my image up, I've got a dirty patch here that I need to clean up, and also this is very annoying. I've got something just creeping into the image just here. This here is creeping in, so I need to get rid of that. And also I don't like this area here, so if you stick around, I'm going to show you now how I'm going to deal with all of these things. Let's very quickly just undo all that. Okay, so I'm back to my standard black and white. Let's first of all clean my image up. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is press Ctrl and J to create a new layer. I wouldn't ordinarily do this, but I'm actually going to type on here clean. Okay, just so that you guys can follow along exactly what I'm doing. It's just simply press J, which is a shortcut for my spot healing brush. I'm going to grab my spot healing brush and I'm going to whip around these offending parts of the image here. Now, before I go on, the one thing I can't stress enough, and this is so important, is that you make sure that you are using your shortcuts, because you notice that when you watch me work, I'll never ever go into my menus ever, because I know the shortcuts. So some of the shortcuts here, for instance, on my mouse there, if I hit that scroll button up and down, then you'll see it automatically zooms in. If I press the space bar there, then I can actually physically move that image around. So if I want to clean these bits up, I can move it around and then press Control and 0 on the keyboard, and that resets my image. So it's much quicker and easier to do it like this than it would be if you kept going into your menu systems. Okay, so let's go ahead and clean this image. Press J, let's select my spot healing brush to begin with, and I'm going to zoom in, come around, okay, and I'm going to very quickly pop all these, pop all these on here and clean them all up. Okay, clean. So look, move, clean. Okay, let's move there. Clean. The reason why my sensor is filthy, by the way, is because I shot this during the day and I needed a 2, 3 or a 4 minute exposure. I needed to shoot with my aperture closed right up. And with my aperture closed right up and my lead 10 stop filter on there, I was able to achieve a 2 minute exposure, I think, or 4 minute exposure. Anyway, and if you close your aperture up, then that's why you see all the offending marks. There's a big mark there, so let's grab that. Okay, big mark there. Okay. Very simply, I'm still using my spot healing brush. I'm just making the actual brush bigger and smaller, and I'm whipping there. Okay, there you go. Okay, now you could take your time, obviously, or the chances are you'll be using a sensor that's not as dirty as mine, or the chances are you will be working on images that wouldn't have been shot at f22. And like I say, f22, that's the reason why you can see every mark that's on your damn sensor. Okay, now there's loads of other different tools I could have used for this. I could have used my patch brush there, okay, my patch healing tool there. I could have used my healing brush, which is that one there. So there's loads of different things I could have used to achieve the same results, but I like that. Okay, now let's give you a couple of tips now then. So this particular one here, I'm going to try and get rid of this here. Again, it's peeping into the frame. If you look at that there, it's peeping into the frame, and I really don't like the way it peeps into the frame. So I'm going to come here and I'm very quickly going to try and remove it. Now again, there's so many different ways of removing the offending item. Let's see what happens, for instance, if I just use my spot healing brush. There, now that ain't bad, okay, but it's not perfect. Let's have a look. Okay, it's not perfect, so let's undo that. Now let's use my patch healing brush. So the patch healing tool, draw around the offending item, and once it's selected, drag it to the side to a like-minded piece of image. My selection's in place, so press Control and D or Command and D on the Mac to remove my selection. There you go, and blend that in just simply by doing that. Okay. there, like so, and you would never notice a difference. Now you can take your time with this, and the worst case scenario is if you don't manage to do that and you're not happy with it, then of course you've got your clone stamp, so you can clone this area from here to here. Or what I'm going to do now is this particular image, if I just undo what I've just done there, this particular image here, for instance, what I can actually do, it's a good little tip, I'm going to grab my marquee tool up here, just my standard marquee tool, my rectangular tool, and I'm going to grab that piece of the horizon there. I'm going to press Control and C or Command and C on the Mac, Control and V to paste a copy of it, or Command and V on the Mac to paste a copy of it, and basically I have a separate copy. So what I can actually do is bring this across here. If I press Control and T, which is my free transform tool, right mouse click, and if I flip it horizontally, okay, so what I've actually done is moved the left hand side of the horizon to the right hand side of the horizon, and I can move that to the edge of the frame, zoom in and make some adjustments there, so it's absolutely spot on. But from here, of course, you can clearly see what I've done. I've copied and pasted from one side to the other. So what I'm going to do now then is hit my layer mask icon, which is that there, B for my brush tool, make sure it's a nice big soft brush, and I'm going to make sure my opacity is at 30%, so press 3 on the keyboard and that changes the opacity to 30%. If I press 5, it went to 50% and so on. So 3 for 30%, and make sure, because at the moment it's white, I want to cut it out, so make sure that your brush is black. And all I'm going to do now is paint along the outside, right around the edge there. Take your time until it blends in. There you go. There you go, look at that. Now I can get away with doing that on this particular image, but if I look at that now, you would never know that in a million years. Never. Okay, so now that's done, all I want to do now is look at this offending item, offending part of the image, or part of the image I want to change that I don't like, which is this bit down here. Now, what I'm going to do with this part of the image now down here is simply this. So before I actually make any adjustments to this part of the image, now what I'm going to do now then is create a new layer to work on. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this particular shortcut that I use all the time, and it's Control Alt Shift and E, or Command Alt Shift and E, I believe, on the Mac. Now what that's actually done is that's now created a fresh layer at 100%. It's almost like flatten or merge visible, but it merges visible as a top layer. So this layer now almost becomes a complete snapshot of where I am within my workflow, but it's also at 100%. Okay, now watch, this is quite cool. I'm going to grab the same tool up here, as my marquee tool. I'm going to grab as much of that water as I possibly can, which is all of that, so you can see my selection there with the running ants, and I'm going to press Control and T. Control and T, remember, is my free transform tool, and all I'm going to do is grab the bottom and drag it down. Look at that, and hit enter. There you go. And Control and D to deselect it, and there you go. That's how I get rid of the bottom bit there. Of course, I can do that here. It's really easy because there's nothing that's noticeable that would look odd by me stretching the lower part of the image, and of course that's the advantage when you use flat water, shall we say. When the water's smoothed out, that's the advantage that you've actually got, and that's it. Now I love that. That's my image pretty much. There's more I can do. I can add some dodge and burn to bring a little bit more detail out into the main focal point here. I can exaggerate the shadows down here as well if I want to, simply by using dodge and burn. By the way, sometimes, more often than not, with a long exposure, I do tend to change my skies with a shot that I've taken using a faster shutter speed to maintain the detail in the clouds. But like I said, the particular image that I want to portray here is a very minimalistic image, and therefore that's the reason why in this particular black and white image, especially over a 2, 3 or a 4 minute exposure, we've got so much movement in the sky, I think it adds to this particular image. But if you want to know how I change my skies over from one image to another image, then that is a tutorial that I'm doing next. So that'll be out on Sunday, or that will be out next Wednesday or Thursday. So check back for that. And that's it. That's my image done. That's how much work I do to my images. And take a look at the finished results, and I'll catch you next week. So that concludes this week's video, fine art photography. Do you agree with my interpretation of what I consider to be fine art photography? Maybe your interpretation is different. If it is, or if it isn't, just let me know in the description below. Leave a comment and let me know, please. And I suppose really the proof is in the pudding, because I will be putting these images on my website for sale. I mean, that is the clear intention of me turning up here tonight, is so I could take some pictures I consider to be A, fine art photography, and B, sellable. And they will be on my website, and they will be up for sale. I'm not saying this now because I want you guys to go on my website and buy the images. I'm just simply telling you that this was my pure intention tonight, was to create pictures that A, are fine art, and B, are sellable. So that's it. If you agree or disagree, if you like the pictures or dislike the pictures, it's fine. This is what we call art. Just let me know in the comments box below. And that's it. If you've enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you think the content is worthy of it.